Hello and welcome to another episode of the Blast Motion Podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Attl, the Director of Professional Baseball here at Blast Motion. Today we're joined by Josh Glenn from Ascent Athlete. He is the Director of Hitting and Player Development, player and catcher at the University of Northern Colorado, a 2021 Buster Posey nominee, and D1 Baseball's top 50 catchers in 2022. He's got 2 years of professional baseball experience. Catching specialist, really great conversation. So let's dig into our conversation with Josh Glenn. Josh, how are you doing today, and where does this podcast find you?
Hi, Kyle. I'm doing great. I am in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So
Nice.
I'm super excited to be on. I'm really excited to dive into some of the metrics a little bit deeper and just kind of talk about how we use them and how they translate a little bit.
Awesome. Can you just give everyone a brief overview of Ascent Athlete, where you guys are at, what you guys are kind of all about, how long you've been there, and your role?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ascent Athlete is about 30 minutes outside of Philly. It's in a town called Garnet Valley, Pennsylvania. We really pride ourselves on something called PDP, so Player Development Program. And like the basis of it is basically it's an all-you-can-eat buffet. You know, we're not a supplement to the meal; we are the meal. And we include hitting, throwing, lifting, all that good stuff. And specifically in our hitting department, we've started to integrate blast motion and some of the different metrics to kind of monitor how our hitters are doing, not only in-house, but when they're out of house as well.
For our viewers, Josh and Ascent Athlete, they came on with Blast Motion about 6 months ago. So if you're thinking about or have also recently joined using Blast, Josh is going to be a great resource for that type of stuff. And we're going to dig right into it. So Josh, with our first topic, can you talk to us about how you guys interpret some of our metrics, what you guys focus on, and how you guys really implemented Blast kind of getting started?
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, like one of our big core principles back in the hitting department is bat speed, right? Like if you swing the bat fast, you make good contact, you're going to hit the ball harder. And hitting the ball hard that's what's happening in the big leagues right now. Everybody wants to do it, right? So good quality contact, good quality ball flight. That's what's going to lead to ultimately being a good hitter with some swing decision stuff mixed in there, right? So as far as the metrics that we really hammer home with, like we love to look at the bat speed stuff. Some of the connection metrics we really like. Early connection we kind of look at as like a timing metric. So not necessarily the end all be all. We're not necessarily looking for a certain range. We're looking for more consistency. We actually find that a lot of our better hitters are more vertical to start and then kind of pull their hands into connection, which is kind of interesting. Connection to impact, again, like I love that 90-degree number, but it's baseball. There's a lot of variables to hitting. So it's not always going to be that perfect 90. But I like looking at that number because that can tell us a story about what kind of ball flight we're getting as well. And that kind of translates back to like the vertical bat angle stuff. We look at vertical bat angle in a sense of relative to the torso, right? So kind of again with the connection numbers. But vertical bat angle for me is actually a really interesting topic just because if you look at the trends in the big leagues recently, vertical bat angle is actually getting flatter. So I think average VBA in the big leagues right now is like around 27, 28. And like a year or two ago, it was like low 30s. So you got to ask yourself why that's happening. And to me, if you kind of match up, the vertical approach angle of pitches is getting lower. So the VAA of release slots and kind of the natural pitch height that pitches are coming in is getting lower and flatter. So therefore, the bat's getting flatter. So that's kind of how we translate a lot. We love rotational acceleration as well. I've really started to get into that one a lot recently with just like different sequencing drills and like kind of how we can improve that one. That one's a lot of fun to kind of watch it happen in real time. But all these metrics are great. And like, I love them to get a baseline, see what the swing looks like in person, see what the swing looks like on blast. And then if that kid has any issues outside of Ascent, he's able to just kind of text us and be like, hey, I didn't feel good today. Like, what's going on? Can you look at my numbers? And the platform you guys have set up for us is fantastic.
That's awesome. I love that you dipped a little bit in each of our three main categories. So we have got power, contact, and consistency. We've got bat speed and rotation on the power side that you talked about. We've got the connection metrics you talked about on the consistency side. So if someone was just starting with Blast, we rambled off like 5 or 6 metrics right there. What do you think are the first two that you guys really start to look at? I'm going to go ahead and assume that bat speed is one of them because it is so important. Is there anything else you're saying? First time user, first time athlete there at Ascent? What are you guys looking at right away, or is it more of a holistic approach?
It's both, right? And that's why I love Blast so much because it's a fantastic tool, and with it's hitting as hard as it is, like there's not going to be anything out there that's going to tell you the entire story of everything on every single swing, right? There's just too many variables, or at least nothing that we can like replicate inside Ascent. Um, so for a first time user, I would really say look at your bat speed, obviously, just see where you're at. The second thing I'd look at is match up what kind of ball flight you get consistently to like your different connection metrics and like even your VBA. From there, you can kind of determine like, okay, I roll over a lot, or I hit a lot of like clippy pop flies, whatever it may be. Looking at your VBA and looking at your connection impact will kind of tell you the story of why. So if you roll over a lot, you may have a really flat VBA, and you may have a really like low connection to impact. So we might see some numbers in like the 70s, whatever it may be, right? And same thing if we're like super clippy. We may be losing barrel a touch early. We may have a super steep VBA and like we may just kind of clip the side or underneath the ball, like whatever it may be. But for me, understanding the profile of the swing a little bit can tell a little bit deeper of a story and how we can get better and how we can get more consistent.
I love that you brought that up. One of the big things we really try and push is that there's personal style and then there's fundamentals. When we're talking about metrics and certain things that are happening in the game that most hitters do, those are fundamentals. But each athlete's going to have their own personal style. So I love that you kind of bring it in there too. I think one thing that comes to mind was there was that interview with Corbin Carroll where he was talking about like what was going on this season, and he specifically said my vertical bat angle is getting too flat, and that is what I'm working on. So looking at that with your profile can be really important. So I'm glad that you dug right into that. So if we've identified some of those things, talk about some of the drills that you guys do and be specific. Our users really like this because you might be listening to this on your way to practice to work with an athlete. So let's talk about some drills that you can do that you guys personally do, why they're helpful, and then maybe these users can literally show up to the field right after listening to this and start implementing it on the field.
Absolutely. So the two drills that I think are absolutely fantastic, especially when we're talking about connection, right? And I'll probably hammer home connection on impact more than anything because getting there can look a lot of different ways, right? But ultimately, where our bat is on contact or the different angles that we're creating with our body is going to produce the kind of ball flight we're getting. So the one that I love a lot and that I think I can program for probably 90% of the hitters in here is just a swing stop. How efficiently can we get to contact and literally stop our body on contact? And it's kind of counterintuitive a lot too, where you have to sequence up in order to stop, but we're cutting off that last part of the kinetic chain. So not only is it an efficiency drill getting to the baseball and making sure we're in a really strong position of contact, but it's also a decel drill to kind of make sure we're not spinning off the ball and we're kind of maintaining our direction to where we want to go. The other one that I like a lot, we used this one recently for rotational acceleration, but it's a Shohei Ohtani drill. And that's a hot word, right? Like any drill with Shohei's name and it's gonna get people's attention, right?
Absolutely.
So the whole premise of the drill is essentially you start with your hands super far away from your body, kind of like how he does in his setup, right? Like he kind of has like that nice bat tip, hands far away from the shoulder. And from there, we're just working on sequencing. We want our hands to come last. So a guy that may have low rotational acceleration, we may find that their hands are just coming at a really similar time as the torso. And ultimately, we still see really high bat speeds with that sometimes. But the bat speeds could be higher in theory if the sequence gets better. So kind of leaving those hands out, letting the body kind of stride, rotate, work from the ground up, letting that kinetic sequence go from knee, pelvis, torso, arms, wrist, hands. We see a lot of ticks up in that rotational acceleration, which is like really, really cool to kind of watch the sequence get better in real time. But there's not too many like constraints with that drill either. You know what I mean? Like it's literally just like put your hands out and go be a good athlete, which kind of goes back to that personal style thing that you're talking about, where guys are going to move differently. There's going to be different movement profiles. We want you to move correctly through your own movement profile. We don't want to change how you move.
I think that's so specific to allow that athlete to move just like themselves and kind of give them a constraint or some sort of self-organization to go ahead and do that. Talk to me a little bit more about the stops. I know I've seen this done before. The first time I was introduced to it, I was hitting in a cage with Jock Peterson in the off season. It was one of the cooler hitting sessions I got to do. Are you holding the bat like you normally do? Are you choking up at all during the stops? Are there any tips that you can give for a first time person doing the swing stops?
So there's a lot of different variables to the swing stop, right? Like there's so many different ways you can do it. Um, a variation that we do here is we use the axe bat, short bat, and long bat trainer. So we'll use it as a kind of like connection drill where you have to get some side bend and like kind of get into your legs a little bit, like mainly really feel like what we're doing with our torso to hit that low and inside pitch without rolling over, right? Um, but we can't do that every day before the game necessarily, right? Like sometimes that long back gets heavy and like that takes a toll on our lat. That takes a toll on our body when we're stopping our body like that. So that's a training drill. A really good checkpoint drill, I think, is using your game bat and choking up about halfway. So like if you use a lizard skin or like what if you don't have like a metal bat or whatever, kind of gripping the top of the grip and stopping on contact. And the checkpoint I really like is making sure that like handle of the bat is kind of lined up with like your lead forearm as we stop. So you'll kind of feel that knob hit your arm on contact. And if that's in line with the rest of our arm, like the chances are like our arm is going to be pretty in line with our torso and it's going to create some good ball flight for us.
That is a phenomenal tip for someone that can literally just go ahead and start doing that drill and really have a good checkpoint for what they're doing. We like to take a moment to talk about one of our partners. My team and I just got back from the Area Code Games in Long Beach, California. We like to thank our partner, the Area Code Games. If you're not familiar with what they do, visit their website at areacodes.com. You'll be able to see information on ID tryout series, Area Code Game tryouts, and some of the other events they put on. They're a phenomenal partner with us and one of the top class organizations and events that happen throughout the world. Let's dive back into our conversation with Josh Glenn. You had mentioned short bats, long bats, the axe bat trainers. How important is it for you guys to change the tool that the athlete has in their hand and why?
So I think it's incredibly important, right? Different constraints that you can give an athlete without giving internal cues is ultimately how hitters become better hitters without giving mechanical adjustments, right? So different weighted implements, different length implements, all that's really doing. And like, I think it's hilarious too, when we talk specifically about bat speed training, people get part of the picture where, yeah, we're training the nervous system to sequence up better. We're training our movement, our muscles to like swing faster. Right. But also we're training like neurological function we have a different way to implement with a very similar time constraint coming at us. And we have to figure out a way to barrel up the baseball with good ball flight. Right. Like when we do like an axe bat day or a long bat, short bat day, we're not just telling our guys to swing it as fast as you can. We don't care if you swing and miss. Like, no, it's not the point. We want you to swing these different weighted implements, different length implements, create good ball flight, be on time, hit the ball square. And all those different things are not only training bat speed and sequencing, but it's training bat to ball as well.
That's a great point. I think we have a lot of conversations, or at least back in the day, use your bat, don't change it, keep the same thing every time. And I think the conversation is more towards like, hey, use different tools, get different patterns, figure out how to time out certain things. And that's going to make you more athletic, a better hitter, and have you be more competitive at your at-bats during the plate. You mentioned internal cues or not giving them, keeping things a little bit more external. I love talking about this topic, so I want to dig into it a little bit more. Internal cues for me are things that I'm physically thinking about in my swing. Elbow goes here. I want this position in my body to do that. And particularly, the more you focus on internal cues, the further away you get from focusing on the external goal, which is to hit the ball hard, use the big part of the field, square things up. How is that balance working for you guys at Ascent, and how do you guys focus on that stuff? You talked a little bit about the drill work, but just dive into that balance so that people can kind of understand how to utilize both of those internal cues and external cues and what you do specifically for them.
So here specifically at Ascent, we have blocked and unblocked training, right? So in our blocked training, that's super controlled, right? That might be your flips. That might even be like a machine that's throwing an easier speed or the same speed every time, right? Like there's no variable on the time constraint necessarily. It's flat, right? Like, and there's going to be a little bit of variable, right? It's not perfect, but those situations, even like some overhand BP, those are the situations, those blocked environments are going to be the times that we can hammer home a little bit more on like the internal cues to try to feel certain things and execute certain movements that we're trying to execute within our own movement patterns, right? That unblocked training is where external cues are king, right? So we do a lot of short box here, which is basically just simulated game pitching. So like I'll throw from like 45 feet. Our director of hitting will throw from like 45 feet, and like we'll literally try to get guys out. I don't care what your connection impact is there. Like I care if you're
Yeah.
hitting the ball well. I care if you're on time. I care if you're making good swing decisions, and I care what your ball flight looks like. We can play around with the other stuff in a flips or like machine setting, right? We do mixed machine, right? Where we have two different machines, or like we vary the timing of how we're feeding the machine. That's another example of unblocked training where like there's so many different variables there. We use a lot of different ball implements. So we use like the smash factor balls, we use light flight balls. And we buy like a lot of different brands of it. So the balls all fly a little bit differently. And again, in that situation, like I don't care what your rotational acceleration is. Like I care if we're making good swing decisions, we're on time, and what your ball flight looks like.
That's such a key point. You're training the swing as a whole, which I think some people, especially as we work with like younger kids, the parents or the kids are so focused on the swing, and the swing is important, but you have to fine train that tool that you have, and then you've got to put it into competition. And I think that that's what you're talking about with the unblocked training. I actually have not heard the blocked unblocked situation, so I really enjoyed kind of hearing that definition of it. Um, Talk to us about how you guys collect with Blast. Are you guys using online mode in situations? Are you guys using offline mode in situations? And how do you guys utilize the sensor as you progress through some of the things that we've talked about?
So we use it in a lot of different ways. And the rep, so the guy that I talk to a lot is DeMarty, JDM. He's awesome. Andrea's been great as well from Blast. But essentially, like the interface that we really like to use and kind of how we utilize it is you have your in-house training, right? Where uh, realistically and ideally, you have like real-time feedback of what's happening. You have your app open, you have your numbers in front of you. And in that block training scenario, right? Like we can look at certain things. And I don't necessarily love training for a certain metric. Um, but we can look at different drills and how it improves certain metrics, right? Like I don't want to chase one certain thing. But as far as like what people do outside of here, that offline mode where they can just click download offline swings after a game, like we use that really well as well because we don't get the game situation in here all the time. Like we do live ABs and stuff like that, and like we get to see the numbers and all that, but nothing's going to replicate a game except the game. And looking at kind of how the swings are translating from in game to what they're doing in house is really unique and valuable for us because we get to kind of piece together the gaps that may be there, right? So we can do a day where like, okay, I think in the game you're getting more tense. Let's really put an emphasis on the effort level in your training today. Can we be loose? Can we be sequency? Can we be flowy? So that when you go into game time, when those lights turn on, we're just naturally doing it. We don't have to think a whole lot about our moves. We can go out there and compete.
That is awesome. Is there anything else you do at Ascent that I think we haven't talked about that you kind of want to dive into, speak about? I know I saw you have your PDP program and PDP Lite. Maybe some of those types of things you could discuss so our viewers can hear that.
So yeah, I think a really good touch on that would be like our eval process. I love our eval process, but we integrate Blast into every eval we do. The eval process is pretty full in depth. We do movement screening, force plate testing, bat speed testing, batted ball data, and then some throwing metrics as well. And if you pitch, we get you on TrackMan. But specifically when it comes to Blast in our eval, that's a really, really good time for us to kind of do the things that we talked about earlier. Like, what are the two things you look for? The main things we look for in our eval are bat speed, just kind of see where they're at, what the baseline is, how we can get better from there. And then the second thing we look at is some other metrics like connection to impact, early connection, and just rotational acceleration as well. For us, time to contact as well is big for us. That's one thing I haven't touched on at all with you yet. But time to contact for us is really, really big because not only is that an efficiency thing, but that's a bat speed thing as well. If our time to contact goes down, in theory, we're going to have more time to make better swing decisions and hit better stuff. So the reason that we hammer home the sequencing and the bat speed stuff so much is because major league average for time to contact is 0.14, 0.15, somewhere in that range. And a lot of the guys we see in here are 0.16, 0.17 to start out. And they're making contact rather deep on the plate. So one of the things that we look really specifically at in the eval is on hit tracks, you can find contact depth. So average major league home run is 9 to 18 inches in front of home plate, which is like really far out there when you look at it, right? And getting to that point, 9 to 18 inches in front of home plate in less than 0.15 seconds is really, really fast, right? Like you have to swing the bat fast to get out there. So it's that happy medium of how do I catch the ball out front without selling out to do it, without cheating to do it. And ultimately that comes down to sequencing and bat speed. So that's kind of like the main thing that we focus on here as well, is like if bat speed goes up, if sequencing maintains or gets better, in theory, time to contact will go down as well.
What are some trends that you guys see in the eval process? You probably run a lot of hitters through at different various ages and levels of play. Are there any trends you see during that eval process? Things that people might do and kind of uncover during that evaluation process?
It's rather comical to me, actually. The trend that we constantly see is deep contact. So we're hitting the ball really, really deep. And we have a hard time pulling the ball in the air. So, and kind of for us too, like statistically speaking, the batted ball in the major leagues that's most likely to be a hit is like 12 degrees to the hitter's pull side. And people don't talk about that a lot, right? Like the old school kind of approach is like backside ground ball, right? And like, I'm not saying don't have that in your tool bag. Like you need to be able to do that. You need to be able to control the barrel in order to execute a backside ground ball. But don't forget the parties out front. You know, like that's where the damage happens. That's where the extra bases happen. That's where the slug happens. So kind of through and through what we see a lot in our evals from, you know, the 13-year-old that comes in here to, you know, the pro guy that comes in here a lot of the time. It's a little bit deeper contact and they may have a hard time elevating the ball to their pull side.
I love that you brought that up because I'm experiencing that a lot right now myself. Is I've got good hitters that just constantly hit the ball the other way. And you say like, hey, let's open it up this round and try and really pull the ball, hit it to the pull side gap. And it just, the whole thing kind of falls apart. And it's because they haven't worked on that. So when you said, you know, you got to have that in your tool bag, being able to go the other way, but you guys are training still to get the ball out in front, hit it to the pull side, go gap to gap. That really hits home. And I think that's a good method for training that literally anyone can go do. Like, make sure you're working on your whole game. And I think that that's where our conversation has really gone. You've got, you know, the blocked and unblocked training. You've got different tools that you're putting in these athletes' hands. You're doing an evaluation process to get real-time feedback using blast data, as well as some of the other technologies. You're hitting heavy balls, you're hitting light balls, little flight. You got different things all the time. I think that that stuff's really important. Back to what you guys are all about, the player development process, how that all ties together. Just hit home for that one more time, just because now that we've talked through everything, I want listeners to go back to what you guys are about and what those principles are. And then now that we have all that information, it should make a lot of sense.
So specifically when it comes to hitting, right? For us, like our main goal at Ascent and my goal as director of player development is I want you to be on time as most as possible. I want you to make good swing decisions, which kind of goes into timing. If we're not on time, we're probably not going to make good swing decisions. So be on time, make good swing decisions, and have good ball flight, right? So good ball flight for me is just, are we able to backspin the ball to multiple parts of the field? Do we have true ball flight? And are we adjustable? Adjustability is such a huge factor in being a good hitter. So kind of even going back to what we just talked about, right? Being able to hit the backside ground ball, but also being able to hit the pull side homer. Are there multiple different parts in our quote unquote load that we're able to get our A swing off from? That's kind of our main principle here is like, how can we be adjustable? How can we make good swing decisions? What does our ball flight look like? Are we on time? And in that respect, can I go translate that to the game, right? Being an adjustable hitter in game is huge. I think my biggest fear is like director of player development or even as like a hitting coach is getting feedback that one of my hitters looks robotic in the box. It's like, oh man, like that stinks. Like I want them to go be a good athlete, right? In their own respect. That's kind of our main principle. Like we want you to figure it out. We want you to do it in your own respective way. We're obviously going to help you a lot along the way, but we want you to go be you.
I love that. Let's play a game. Just came up with it right now, so we're just going to shoot this live. We're going to do 3 key points. I'm going to start with 1. You're going to do the other 2. My first one is important takeaways for this episode, the unblocked training. I heard a story, I think it was out there a couple years ago, of like an Astros minor leaguer, and they talked about that unblocked training that you talked about, where they would set up 45 feet away, coaches trying to dice people up. And they were, I forgot what level they were at, but they were getting blown up in BP, so much so that the other team was out there watching them. They're breaking bats in BP. They're like, what is going on? They're really competing. And then they went out there and they smoked them like 10-1. And it was training in that, what you called unblocked environment, which I'm going to put in my pocket. But I think that that's a lot of times at the youth level, or you're a parent working with your player. Don't be afraid to get that challenging environment. Raise the stakes up to 104%, where they've really got to hit something hard. They're practicing in the game. When we're hitting balls hard in the game, I mean, you're hitting 300 at any level, that's going to be good, especially in the big leagues. So that failure to success rate is important. So the unblocked training, the 45 feet, real-time game BP, that's going to be my one major takeaway. Go ahead and fill the other 2 for me.
So the one that I think is really important is, when utilizing blast, I would say don't necessarily chase the metric, chase the movement pattern. So as you're working with blast, as you're looking at the data, remember, this is the blueprint, right? It's an unbiased opinion. It's not going to tell you good swing. It's going to tell you what your numbers are, whether that's good or bad. Find the movement pattern in your own respect. Don't necessarily chase a specific metric. Chase a movement pattern, chase ball flight, chase adjustability. I think that's number 2. Number 3 for me is, don't forget to play the game of baseball. There's a lot of training out there where it doesn't always translate to on-field success. And at the end of the day, making training harder than the game is ultimately the goal, so that the game can become easier, right? So don't get so caught up on the training aspect of things that you forget how to play the game. There's still a lot of really important aspects to being a good teammate, being a good baseball player overall, that really integrate well into what we do specifically here at Ascent, but what's happening in real time in the big leagues as well.
Josh, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I hope everyone enjoyed everything from internal cues to external cues, blocked and unblocked training environments, and what you guys do at Ascent. Josh, thank you for your time, and we'll see you guys next episode.
Thank you so much, Kyle.